Good afternoon, everyone. I'm Alyssa Mitchell, the director of the USI Center for Social Justice Education, housed in the Department of Social Work. And we are so pleased that you're joining us today for our webinar, Conspiracy Theories, How They Threaten Us and How to Stop the Spread of Misinformation. This is part of our media and voter education project, which you can find on our website and social media accounts. I'm very pleased to introduce our speakers, Dr. Todd Schroer and Becca Neal. And without further ado, I'll turn it over to them. Todd?
Okay, thanks. I'll start sharing my screen. Okay, is it on? Excellent. Okay. First, I'd like to thank Dr. Mitchell for setting this up along with a bunch of other very good presentations this year and in the past, and as well as thank the committee, which I'm actually part of, for putting this on as well. Okay, so today I'm going to talk about a variety of conspiracy theories, a little bit about them and how they threaten us. I am going to talk rather fast. I do anyway, but I have a lot of things I'd like to cover. And then Becca will come in and she will show us how we can try to not get sucked in by these conspiracies. Okay, alrighty. So let's begin. Okay, so today what I'm going to talk about just very quickly is what are conspiracy theories in general, what are some of the core ideas, and a little bit of a short history of four of the largest current conspiracy theories, which is QAnon, Stop the Steal or the Big Lie, depending on which side you are on that, the kind of clump together the anti-vax, anti-masking, and COVID-19, and then the Great Replacement. Talk a little bit about the overlap between the conspiracies and then look at the impacts that we can see arising from these. So what are conspiracy theories? Well, basically, it's a theory that rejects kind of the usual explanation for something. It instead is saying that there's this covert group, organization, usually a secret, powerful one, that has been carrying this out, and that this has been behind many different kind of events, whether they're talking about political, economic, social trends and things, and that what happens is never random, never by chance, that everything's happening because it's part of a plot overall. Okay. So if we look at kind of the common characteristics of them, oftentimes conspiracy theories are very, very emotional in the content that they are using when they're talking about issues. They are not relying as much upon facts, if we put it that way, okay? The believers in these theories really resist change, any kind of ideas that go against them, they just don't really accept. And the exposure to the messages increases the beliefs in these theories. The more you hear them, the more likely you are to absorb them and believe in them. So if we look at kind of the main components, and I got all this from Chip Burley, an individual that studied conspiracies for quite some time. There are these four main components. You have this dualistic division, right? The world is between good and bad. It's black and white. There's no gray area. You are using language that is demonizing all the opponents, that they're evil, they're subhuman, they are subversive. You are targeting people to blame for whatever problem they see as occurring, right? That they are the ones causing our troubles. We are blameless for what occurs. And there's also this mixed in with this is this idea of apocalyptic aggression, right? That you have to act now to stop this huge tragic event that is coming down the pike. So if we look at the current conspiracy theories, and we'll start with QAnon, just very briefly. So this begins in October 2017. You have this anonymous post put up by someone claiming that they have high-level security clearance, Q-level security clearance. They make thousands of posts between 2017 and 2020. And the ideas that were being espoused by Q and their followers is starts to influence overall society, moving from very obscure places like 4chan, 8chan, to much more mainstream media. Okay. The main beliefs in Q is that everything is controlled by the satanic pedophile organizations that's basically made up of the media, the politicians, primarily Democrats, other groups, right, actors, Hollywood, stuff like that, and that they are basically trafficking children worldwide for sexual purposes, that they do things like they drink the adrenochrome they're draining from children to extend their lives. And they believe that this idea that the storm is coming, right? There's going to be this great revolution that's going to bring about a change in society that's going to get rid of these evil elites that are controlling everything behind the scenes, restore society to the way it should be, or the way they think it was in the past, or whatever it is. And for Q, they basically had the idea that President Trump is there fighting the power that be in the deep state, right? Okay, the popularity of Q really doesn't abate over time, even though Q continually makes wrong predictions, right? The first main prediction that Q made was in the fall of 2017, saying that Hillary Rodham Clinton was going to be arrested. Then over time, there's all kinds of other things that they were going to say, that the storm is coming, that they're going to arrest and execute the elites, the media, Democrats, whatever, something along those lines. Media companies took some efforts to try to squash Q a little bit. So they deplatformed them, they removed them from this. And so what you have happening is that they move from basically from fringe social media to fringe social media, places you've probably never even heard of unless you're part of these things, but they're much, much smaller in numbers. Just to kind of show you a little bit about this. So this is looking at, this did a huge data analysis of all of the times certain terms that are popular for QAnon show up in major social media. And this one's related to different time periods. So you can see these are some of the major ideas down here that they are, well, okay, sorry about that. Back up. And different time periods. So, you know, Twitter accounts banned, drop dramatically. YouTube takes them off, it starts to go down over time. Okay, you can see how they start to switch, right? Starts its mainstream platforms, then they go to alternative platforms after Twitter closes, but now it's pretty much gone down a lot. QAnon seems to be kind of waning overall. But the issue is that the ideas behind this, the main ideas live on, right? So you have very large amounts of the American population that believe some of the main ideas in Q, the conspiracy. You know, that the government, the media, the financial worlds in the US are controlled by the Satan worshiping pedophiles. You have 15% of American population that believes that. It rises up to 23% for Republicans, and then lower for other categories. That there's a storm coming that's going to sweep away all these elites in power and restore the rightful rulers. So that's even greater percentage of the population, 20%. And then basically that you have to turn to violence, right, to save the country in some way. So still, those ideas are very prevalent in our society. And it really is related to kind of information that you're absorbing, right? Like I said, exposure to these things are important. So they're most likely to say, people are most likely to say that they believe these things if they're watching certain types of media, right? So we usually think of Fox News as the right, but this is, you know, we're talking about things like One American News Network and Newsmax and those sort of things. You can see that they are much, much likelier to, like basically 3 times the level of all Americans combined if they are watching those far right sources overall, which we can see, you know, here. Okay. Okay, so the second one I want to talk about is the Stop the Steal and the Big Lie. Okay, the history of this is that basically President Trump in 2016, after he was elected, starts to argue that he would have actually won the popular vote, which he did not, by millions, but illegal immigrants, other people voted in that election. Okay, this starts to take it starts to grow. By 2018, Republicans start to complain that they lost because of rigged elections. And you know, you start to see right after 2020 elections that Trump declared victory, right? On November 4th, you saw that his campaign lawyers started to challenge the election results, losing pretty much every one of the cases they brought, 61 of the 62 that they put forward, being chastised by judges for how weak the arguments they were making were. Trump went on to do other things like pressuring state Republican legislatures to try to dispute the results, even though all the results, you know, were certified by December 9th and the Electoral College voted that Biden won. Trump continued with other efforts like trying to argue that that the Department of Justice should try to declare that this was a false and rigged sort of thing. Okay, so he's the main proponent, but the main belief overall is that the Democrats, and more specifically Biden, won through fraud in some ways, right? And there's all kinds of subplots in this, that there is the Dominion voting machines were rigged, that all kinds of or the people that should not be able to voted, like non-citizens or other people voted multiple times, and that the mainstream media helped to cover up this fraud in some way. And this is very much believed by who you end up voting for in the beginning, right? So if people voted for Biden, they basically said that only 2% said that there were illegal fraud in voting. If there were Trump voters, there was about 70% of people that voted for Trump said that Biden won because of fraud, right? And it's kind of interesting to see politicians arguing the same thing in the Republican Party, even though they were elected in those same elections, they're saying they're fraudulent, but that's a different story. The next theory I want to talk about is the Great Replacement theory. And I'm going to start backwards this time and talk about the main beliefs of this. Wow, okay. Okay, sorry, just making sure I can do stuff. Okay, the Great Replacement theory. So the main beliefs of the Great Replacement theory is that basically white Europeans and Americans are being replaced by non-whites, that this is being purposely done to destroy the culture and the race overall. I need to jump ahead here a little bit because I mixed those up. The ideas that support this idea that whites are being replaced by non-whites through a secret plot has a long history in terms of where it's coming from. So you have it rising first from ideas about the scientific racism, right? Basically, so it's the creation of the idea that there are races of people, although of course there was never agreement on how many races actually existed. And this comes out primarily in the way that we think of the race by biologists, anthropologists, people like Linnaeus and stuff like that in the 1700s. And they're basically arguing that however many races they say exist, they have these innate characteristics, like whether they're intelligent, whether they're going to be criminal, whatever. And starting in the late 1800s and the early 1900s, you have the eugenics movement that really takes this to a higher level, called racial hygiene in Germany. And the idea is that you're going to improve the races, right? So there's the idea that certain races can be graded, some are better than others. And so there's these policies you're trying to do when you're trying to control who is allowed to have children. So there's positive ones, you push the people that you think are the good people to have more children through educating them on that they shouldn't, marry down or marry across races or whatever it might be, as well as paying them money to have more children, right? There's this negative policies with eugenics though as well, that you stop the unfit from reproducing. So there's forced sterilization, anti-miscegenation, and things along those lines. Okay. There's also like the idea of immigration, right? That is destroying the character of nations in some way. They portray it as an invasion. You can see this, back from the early 1900s from a cartoon and a political cartoon in a newspaper. And the idea is that not only is the nation going to be destroyed, the ideals, the institutions, but the race is going to be destroyed as well. So down in the corner there, that is actually a clock that it runs down to when whites will be only 50% of the United States population. So it's like a doomsday clock that's running down related to that idea for these people. Okay, there's many different versions of this with a lot of great overlap between them. So sometimes this is called racial suicide, or people have talked about it as white genocide or white replacement, or the Great Replacement is the much more acceptable way to talk about this. And the terms that are used are slightly different, from some being very blatantly racist and racial in orientation to using more code words like legacy Americans. Okay. You can see the popularity of this idea. Most people in America really probably weren't very aware of these kind of ideas, or at least this conglomeration of ideas until the Unite the Right rally. The night before that, you had the people marching around with the torches at night saying things like, Jews will not replace us. And that's directly related to this kind of ideas, or you will not replace us. And that's who they're talking about as non-whites. And these ideas move from pretty fringe, from white nationalists, white supremacists, through social media to the far right media to now the mainstream in many ways. So you can see, like, for example, that Tucker Carlson's, the way that he talks about it is there's replacement of legacy Americans, is the word he uses, with more obedient people from faraway countries. You have other people that are powerful in the US, like US representatives like Babin, Getz. You have leaders of like Turning Point USA, which is a far-right youth organizations that are parroting the exact same words. White supremacists are so elated about this because they're saying finally they can get out and convince all these people of what they've been saying forever, because now you have these more legitimate individuals talking about this. And to see how prevalent this idea is in society, this is a poll from from August. And so the question was, is God intended America to be a new promised land where European Christians could create a society that could be an example to the rest of the world? 30% of all Americans agree on that. And that is very different, depending on what you believe and what kind of media you absorb as well. All right. Okay, let me go back. Sorry, I had one thing out of, okay. The next one I want to talk about is the anti-masking, COVID-19. There's, of course, a long history of anti-vaccination beliefs, but what we think of as the movement today really took off in 1998. You had the publication of this, what turns out to be a pseudoscientific sort of study that said that the MMR vaccines caused harms, more specifically talking about autism. This went through the media very rapidly in mainstream media. And although that article was pulled and that it was, basically found to be false, that really set it on fire. You start to see the rise of anti-masking coming about because of COVID restrictions in terms of the history of that. And the idea that COVID-19 doesn't exist and is a conspiracy in some way started to thrive almost instantly. So if we look at the main beliefs, kind of putting them together, is that vaccines are dangerous, right? That it's killing all the vaccinated people, right? So they're saying, for example, that there's this second wave of COVID injection deaths that are occurring right now. They say that this is doing things like modifying your DNA. It's a way to destroy your genes that can overlap with the great replacement theory sort of stuff that some, more moderates would argue that's a violation of rights to mandate people to have vaccines. But others are saying things like this is actually secretly a bioweapon that's being used to destroy individuals, especially whites and Americans along those lines, or that it's going to be used to put a tracking device inside of you so that they can know where you all the time because you're getting chipped up, right? It's funny that people that argue that oftentimes are carrying around a smartphone in their pocket, which actually does have a chip that follows you around everywhere you go. The other arguments they're saying is that this masking is bad, right? That this is a violation of individual liberties, but beyond that, some of them are saying it's completely ineffective, right? That it doesn't work, it doesn't stop transmission, and then go on beyond that, that it does things like it kills your brains, that people are advocating for this so that they can take control of your mind, right? It makes you susceptible to being controlled. They say, for example, that breathing in the CO2 by wearing a mask is destroying your brain cells, and that's why we have so many stupid surgeons in the United States, right? Because all the masks that they wear. That was a joke. Or they're saying basically that COVID is completely fake, okay, that it doesn't exist at all. So if we look at the popularity of these kind of ideas, we can look at different polls, and these are all the polls I'm showing you are from very, very recent polls. So how much of the US population feels that it's safe and effective? About 65% says so, 29% says not. You can see on the other chart that it's showing you basically over time, the answers to this question, basically, would you be vaccinated if you could? They started it before it was actually available to people. And then, yes, if they had, you can see that the number of people that say no has steadily dropped over time. But still, you're seeing pretty large numbers of people that are not necessarily saying they are going to get vaccinated. Masks, very similar sort of stuff as well. About a quarter of people in the US said they will never wear masks going forward in any kind of public indoor settings, even though that might be mandated by law. You also have people saying that they, once again, don't believe, a quarter of people say that they don't believe that masks do anything at all to help. We talk about the idea that COVID is dangerous. That basically we can see that there's a wide divergence in what people think of the danger from COVID is. Primarily, we see similar ideas between Democrats and people that are more leaning towards Democrats, and then Republicans and the people who are leaning towards Republican in similarities in the US economy, but we see a lot of differences in the ideas of whether it's actually any kind of health threat, right? So 38% currently of individuals that are Republican are feeling that COVID virus is in any way a public health threat, where you have very large percentages of the Democratic population. Okay, so that again. Okay, what we've seen though that has happened over time, and this has happened in the past before, is the merging of these movements, merging of different types of conspiracy theories. This happened, we saw it happen with in the 1990s. You had a variety of ideas like sovereign citizens movements, anti-tax protesters, gun rights groups. They kind of all came together and to form basically the militia movements. And we're seeing the same thing happening now as well. You can see it in a lot of different ways. So you can see that more and more people are starting to flock to both or all of these theories, are starting to believe in them. This one from the Reawaken America tour. So that's Flynn right in the front, General Flynn. He is a denier. He's of basically that he believes in stop the steal kind of stuff. And you can see the pillow guy, a bunch of different people on here. But in the bottom, you can see like all the different ideas that they have there. It's like, the COVID vaccine, COVID therapies, there are others, the truth about the election fraud, the truth about Black Lives Matters, and George Soros, right? Which is a code word basically for Jews controlling the world, right? It's part of the idea behind that. You can see that Tucker Carlson has a full documentary on the idea that basically the January 6th insurgency was in no way a coup, that it was an Antifa group that did it, or that they're martyrs, all kinds of stuff. So he's embracing great replacement theory, the same sort of stop the steal stuff as well. Okay. The people that believe in these, there's a big overlap in terms of this as well. So these are three different questions they're asking about. The COVID-19 vaccine has a surveillance microchip, and that is the sign of the beast in biblical prophecy. That's 9% of all Americans, but 39% of the people I believe that coronavirus was developed and attention in labs by scientists, and 29% overall say that the election was stolen from Trump. People that believe in QAnon, though, look how much higher all of these other beliefs are, right? That 85% believes that COVID was created by scientists in a lab. 73% of the QAnon believers believe that it was stolen, Trump was stolen, that 39% of them feel that. And so very, very big overlaps. So we can see it in polls, we can see it in many other ways as well. So if we talk just very briefly about the impacts then of these conspiracy theories, and we talk first about health, okay? You can see that masks, for example, we see very large differences in where other people are wearing masks or not, based on their political views. This is obviously related to kind of the ideas that they hold, related, as we saw earlier, about in terms of whether COVID is real, masks work, that kind of stuff as well. You can even look at vaccination rates and see like where people are getting basically the larger the share of people that in that place that voted for Biden, the higher the level of vaccinated. The lower the number of people that voted for Biden and said voted for Trump, the much less vaccination that you see occurring there. Right? And of course, if you're having less mask wearing in certain places and less vaccinations occurring, you are seeing dramatic differences in COVID cases, right? So you can look at taking it down to the county level and see that the daily new averages in counties that voted for Trump is much, much higher than those that voted for Biden, which is at the bottom, and then where it was like neither got more than 60% of the vote at least there. And of course, that's not just cases, it is deaths as well. So you can see much, much higher levels of COVID death rates per 100,000 in Trump counties versus Biden supporting counties overall. Okay. You also see health being hurt in other ways. So the people that are anti-vax, they are basically pushing people to leave ICUs. They're pushing people to try to buy other kinds of things that are going to make them better. Whether kind of it's like a veterinary clinic drug or whatever it might be that's going to make them all better, some sort of magic solve that they have. You also see people committing other types of crimes that are going to hurt people, that they're selling fake vaccine cards so that people can subvert any kind of mandate, which is going to then help the virus pass along as well. We look at the political impacts of these, we can see that although there was no proof at all of any sort of fraud that occurred in the 2020 elections, that look at all the recounts they did and it changed nothing, right? You have recounts in Republican counties, Republican states, and they never found any kind of large scale or even hardly any at all sort of fraud that occurred. But you had a lot of states starting to ban or starting to pass a variety of laws to make it harder for Americans to vote because they say that that's what occurred, that there was a lot of fraud. Okay. In terms of masks, you see politically kind of overlooked with that. You had a number, this is before the federal mandates, the number of states that passed laws that said you could not have a mask. So they banned that there. That also is overlapping with basically political views as well of the state legislatures and who's in power. Okay. And you saw, to relate this to politics, that they're not just trying to pass laws, they're trying to completely change the rules, as well as getting rid of anyone that's basically overseeing any kind of elections. So even in places where Trump got 70% of the vote or more, they are saying that it was still a conspiracy. They're getting rid of Republicans that are working in the polls because they're trying to gain even more control of this. You see other kinds of things occurring in this political. So you have people that are denying the coronavirus is even real, says the viruses, the vaccines are fake, and that person is appointed to basically a regional health board in Idaho by politicians. But of course, it doesn't end there. We have a lot of violence that's associated with a variety of these conspiracy theories. We can see that, QAnon offenders have basically, there's 101 of them that have committed ideologically motivated crimes, killing about 10 people. You have people that believed that the COVID vaccines were poison, so he killed his own brother, who was a pharmacist. You have individuals that are in Congress that are saying that stop the steal curd. If it keeps happening, it's going to be bloodshed in society, right? You see threats taking place against members of Congress more and more all the time. You see that also not only at the national level, but at the state levels as well. You see that, sorry, I should have gotten rid of that one. Public health officials are being focused on. You have others as well. We can even see this in the January 6th insurrection, right, where all of these things are basically coming together. There were a lot of precursors coming up to this. You had a lot of state house protests that were armed, that were anti-masking, anti-vax sort of ideas, or stop the steal things that overlap. People going into the Michigan legislature, for example, the Idaho, Oregon, a variety of different places in the US. You can see all of the variety of these groups we just talked about, the symbols that were there that are being used. You see Q symbols, you see, I can point out more of them for you, but basically the emergence of all of these different ideas. And you even have, the ideas of very high levels of violence, right? People come with flex ties, which are, you're not bringing those around for no reason, right? That is a planned activity to take people hostages, right? You had the noose that was laid out in front. Basically, that was supposed to be for Pence, because Pence was, he wouldn't overturn the election results. If we look at the people that were part of that actually, I look at a couple different studies that took place in the siege of the Capitol that were charged, okay? In this one study that comes from George Washington University, they saw that the militant networks were a small portion of the people that were actually committing these actions. You had other people that were organized into clusters, basically groups of people that did this. And then you had people that just kind of were inspired by this, that they planned to go there themselves and they just kind of got swept up with it and followed along. If we look at a more detailed and more recent study on this, that's continually updated as more people are pressed with charges, you can see that there's kind of a big difference from previous sort of far-right violence that existed in the past, right? This is more of a violent mass movement overall. 87% of the people that have been charged had no pre-existing ties to militias or extremist groups, organizations. Trump is definitely the leader of this movement overall. They came there. They would have not come there without Trump. They said that they were following Trump's call to action. I mean, look at what people are saying that have charges pressed against them, right? The movement demographics are changing compared to the past, right? You have much older groups of people. 66% were over the age of 35. That's like 4 times the rate for right-wing extremists in the past. You see a lot more people that are business owners, that are white collar, these kind of things compared to others in the past. And we've seen since that time I mean, even right after that, you had people in Congress saying that Antifa did this. This isn't, Republicans are Trump supporters. To the point today where you've had, a variety of people saying, no, that wasn't even enough. It's actually the FBI instigated the whole Capitol riots, that they had, agent provocateurs that are doing this. And over time, you see fewer and fewer people that are basically Republican that are saying that you should actually do anything. That it's important to go after the people, that it's dropped dramatically. You can see that between March and September of this year overall. That's thinking it's not as important as you start to hear these messages all the time, right? But to remind you all, I mean, you had about 1,000 assaults on law enforcement occurring. You had law enforcement dying. You had mass destruction and vandalism that occurred. I mean, you've easily watched all of the battles that are taking place between law enforcement and the individuals that are there, right? That's not hard to find. But to kind of sum this up and just finish it off to go towards the future, these things have all come together and the future is rather bleak in many ways. If we talk about overall like an American insurgent movement that is basically saying that Biden is illegitimate, that's a stop the steal idea, that you should restore Trump by force, which are two of the big key things basically that we talked about. You have millions upon millions of Americans that are part of this, right? And then of the 21 million, if we look at this, this is not based on who did things at the Capitol. This is based on a nationwide survey, okay? You can see, once again, the media is very, very important that you absorb if you are, or your beliefs, I'm sorry, in terms of this one. QAnon believers are, they're 600 times more likely to be part of this basically armed movement that feels that society needs to be changed. Great replacement theory is also very high up there as well. So, like I said, I just was going to talk fast and give you a little overview of some of these things. I know I left a lot of stuff out, and I'm sorry that I had a slide in the wrong spot, but I'm going to turn it over to Becca.
Rock and roll. So I will pause for dramatic effect while I figure out how to share my screen, like I haven't been on Zoom for the past 2 years. And Todd, I don't know if you want to take a look at any of those questions in the Q&A. So, first of all, are we seeing a PowerPoint?
Yes, you're good.
Awesome. I love it when things work properly. Cool. So hello, everyone. I am Becca Neal here with Dr. Shore on this fine evening to talk about really the practical implications of spotting misinformation and of really just thinking about our place within information ecosystems in order to connect with other people in our environments and then share proper factful information. So I'm going to move right along. And here we go. Just kind of frame this whole part of the discussion by noting that we operate, again, within information ecosystems. You can think of those as information environments, right? And the primary thing to keep in mind here, and I was thinking about this especially as I'm following the very lively chat, is that there's no such thing as a neutral information environment. And that's something that it is just very important to keep in mind whenever you are talking to other people, whenever you're reading information. Neutrality is one of the biggest myths out there. So even before we broach the subject of the interwebs, as it were, let's think about how we build our information, our knowledge bases as we grow and as we progress through life. So I'll have some really fun little illustrations here for you. So let's think about when we're young, right? We learn from our families and from people that are in close proximity to us. Then as we get older, our circles expand a little bit. We have friends, we have teachers as we enter the education system. And after that, our circles expand to include a variety of acquaintances that we meet along the way. And our environments kind of diversify in that effect. And it's important to keep in mind as we're meeting people, right? They're coming to our analog social networks, as it were, with their own social networks that are feeding how they conceptualize the world and how they get information. And kind of the nebulous factor here is that this is all informed by the communities that we are part of and by society. And I can say, broadly, us here, we are all very influenced by Western society. So there are many lenses that kind of dictate the information that kind of pops into our environments. Now, there are attempts at neutrality, or at least expanding the scope, diversifying what we have available within our information ecosystems. So some of you may have heard of institutions known as libraries. And it's important to note here that even libraries aren't neutral, right? Libraries are products of communities, of society. And I could talk for another entire session on how not neutral library classification systems are, right? So there's just a whole bunch to unpack there. So I'll move back to our network because, it's probably not time to unpack that right now. But we're talking about our networks and how even if we have these incredibly diverse networks, we as humans, as social beings, still tend to surround ourselves with, at least in our inner circles, with like-minded individuals. So folks that maintain similar ideologies and outlooks on life, people with the similar preferences as to which Star Trek series is the best. So, when we're talking about the important things. So that means that whenever we pop over to the interwebs, when we transfer our information sharing and consumption over to an online environment, we are recreating those like-minded circles in online environments. And this is particularly relevant as we gravitate toward people with social mindsets or with similar mindsets in social media, and we read content on different platforms that really resonates with our particular viewpoints, our ideologies, or even less, and on a less intense level, our general interests, right? But the thing is that when we create these circles in online environments, we're creating these feedback loops of information and shared viewpoints to where we're saying something and it's pretty much just coming right back at us. And there are some serious but very hidden repercussions when we are doing this in an online environment. And so to fully understand those repercussions, we need to have a talk about algorithms. So algorithms are computational search and display functions in online environments, and they can be super basic and super minimally invasive, right? So when we're looking at library databases, there are algorithms at play here that weight our results. So we're rating results on keyword matches, on source type, on things like that. But algorithms can clearly be more complex and not even require an active search. So we don't even have to be going to look for information. We're going to be fed it regardless of our desire to get it, whenever we open a specific web page or an app. So for a lighthearted example here, I'm a runner, right? So my social media accounts, my Amazon account, my mobile Chrome browser, I'm inundated with trail pictures and running paraphernalia. And it's sometimes kind of cool, right? So I can log into Netflix and the algo's like, hey, I hear you like Star Trek. Here's some more Star Trek. And I'm like, all right, Netflix, that's what I paid you for. Thank you so much. And the same is for Spotify or Pandora, right? They deliver on these great personalization algorithms that we want. We want similar content sometimes. But where this gets incredibly tricky is when we rely on, or even just kind of passively interact with suggestions that are pushed our way based on the data that we are giving these algorithms day in and day out. So for an illustration, I will bare my YouTube soul to you. These are the suggestions that YouTube just kind of passively tosses at me as I log in with my Becca Neal account in Google. So it's a big old pile of music and running stuff, and sometimes things that are just kind of bizarrely connected to other stuff I look at. That said, if I popped over to YouTube in a different browser with an unconnected account, here's an example where I just did exclusively Fox News searches. And now I could have done this with any news outlet. This one just came to mind, so I'm really not trying to call anybody out here. But you'll note that whenever I open the YouTube homepage again, after I've done these searches, the suggestions that I'm getting are all very like-minded, right? So these are all from right-leaning media outlets. And so if I am searching the same thing over and over again, I'm getting the same thing back. And note that I am in no way faulting YouTube or other platforms for using these algorithms, because as I pointed out earlier, we've all grown to know and love these levels of personalization by now, right? But these algorithmic mechanisms can be highly problematic, like hashtag highly problematic. Whenever we reach that point of complacency and we just kind of roll into that passive scrolling to find content that feeds into our own feedback loops, or are otherwise known as filter bubbles, right? And so what I'm getting at here is that online information consumption requires a high level of continual critical evaluation. We've always got to be thinking, okay, how is my personal data, how are my personal actions in an online environment driving what I see? Or how are the actions of the people I'm connected to via social media driving the content I see? What are my Twitter followers or the people I follow on Twitter? What are they doing, and how is that driving my content? Additionally, what red flags should I be looking for in general? And then, of course, what other sources should I be actively consulting rather than passively consulting to really cross-check different pieces of information? So we will start with just some super basic general considerations, which are honestly, for the most of you, going to be really reminiscent of the critical evaluation tips that we all got in high school or in our early undergrad writing courses, but that it's really easy to just kind of push off whenever we're mindlessly scrolling through the interwebs. So we're looking at the writing style and the tone. We're looking at the context of the information. And of course, we are always in any online environment looking at the authority of who is presenting that information to us. So note that I also used a really obvious example that I'm going to go back to over and over again. But the problem is successful persuasion and intentional misinformation can be super subtle. So note, it's not always going to look like this, but for the purposes of this presentation, this is what's going to work. So we can break these down kind of as follows. Our style and tone, that's a pretty broad terminology, but here's how we can look at that granularly. So if we're looking at written content, if we're watching a video or something like that, is the message composed with that pathos-driven vocabulary, right? Are they really pulling at our emotions? Is that the purpose here? Is this clearly persuasion material? And kind of going along with that, is this written in the second person? Now, not all things written in the second person are bad, but a combination of that pathos vocabulary and the second person just kind of should raise some red flags in terms of how totally reliable this is in conjunction with some other factors. Along those lines, is the piece suggesting or demanding action of us, right? So if I'm going back to this particular resource, we've got our pathos language, right? Satan being really good and rotten evil. And we've got second person here, and we have demands or suggestions, right? To stop taking bait, to speak the truth, and to go to Congress and do resolutions, right? So this is clearly all not to inform us. This is to persuade us to action. And we should always, no matter the content, really question when people are persuading us to do a thing. And along those lines, is this content generalizing or is it marginalizing a specific population of people? Whenever we generalize, we get into really dangerous territories, right? So on a not as extreme level as we've seen in other examples, this is particularly generalizing communists, right? So all communists are masters of deceit, and that should be problematic for anyone who is looking for a logical discussion here, or to actually fact check something, because there really isn't a fact, a checkable fact given here. So that is our kind of general style and tone. Moving along is the context. So first of all, is one provided? It is so frequent that we see quotes from figures of authority or from famous people taken completely out of context, which kind of goes along with, is there a source cited? Right? Do we have a link back? Do we have some way of figuring out where this quote even came from? Or is this somebody who's really mad at someone else just kind of throwing things out there into the wind? Likewise, what particular format are we looking at? So not to totally harsh on TikTok, but if I'm looking for super reliable, credible information, it's probably not going to take that format. Now, our TikTok videos, things that I'm going to kind of roll into and refer to kind of, I guess, reaffirm my little feedback loop of things I like. Absolutely. They're short and they're easily digestible. But if I'm looking for actual facts, for reliable information, maybe I'm looking for a different format. And this does clearly differ by context, right? There is no one format that rules them all. It's all just totally dependent. But so long as the context also fits, let me back up here, the proper style and tone for something that is authoritative, which I'll talk about in a second. Additionally, in terms of just more visible context, right? So there can be good content out there that is taking the form of opinion articles. Opinion articles usually they get a lot of flack, right, for being just that, for being opinions. But if they're properly labeled as such, and if they are given a proper context within a larger information environment, within a larger publication or platform, that's respectable on the part of the platform, right? They're telling you right off that we are labeling this as an opinion, not as like the facts for you, right? That's a huge thing to kind of look for, whereas some less reliable information sources don't label these things as such. They just push it out as this is fact, this is what we need you to believe, this is what we need you to do. So context is highly important and highly complex, but there are a lot of very kind of blatant red flags whenever we're really looking at context. Next. And then finally, from that first little bit, we have the issues of authority and transparency. So these can be pretty straightforward, but they can also be not very straightforward. And before I talk about authority, I just want to talk about transparency, right? So if you're looking at something and you're not really sure who wrote it, or you're not really sure who the organization is that is kind of operating this platform or whatnot, that's a problem. If people are going to tell you something, if they're going to inform you, they better be telling you who they are and from whence their authority is derived. So if you're looking at, to go back to one of Todd's examples, if we're talking about, epidemiological information here, I'm going to demand that the person telling me about vaccines has that medical background, right? That's the person I'm going to trust, as opposed to Jim's mom, who has an opinion on vaccines or other illnesses, right? Any sort of medical information. So these, again, seem like very straightforward sort of options. But when we get into the types of misinformation that feed into conspiracies, we are so frequently not really working in the realm of logic anymore. We have these emotional and ideological responses to things that sometimes blur those red flags. So it's super important to take a step back and just kind of rethink our points of authority in our context. So the next is the founding institution, right? So there are lots of platforms out there that have, corporate foundations, which are totally cool. I mean, mainstream news media is corporate, right? It's a moneymaker. You're not going to find a .org well, you will find .org news sites, but it's okay that, the big ones are not .orgs, right? That's not the be all end all. But again, just the fact that the funding org is transparent is a huge piece here. And especially whenever we get into, actual research information, which moves along to funding sources, right? So if we're looking at an article on how vaping helps people quit smoking, who funded that? Was it funded by vaping corporations, or was it funded by, the federal government or an academic institution, right? These are really important things to keep in mind. And it's so vital that the resource tell you exactly who funded the information and who funded the research. So huge deals there. I know that I have thrown just kind of a lot of information at you here, and it's really difficult to just kind of talk about these things in the abstract without tying them directly to what you're experiencing in daily life. But I know that we can all recognize our social media experiences and things like that. And I also do want to let you know that there are tools here. There are tools to help you if you are having trouble sort of differentiating some of these falsehoods from reality, or perhaps slightly less reliable information from more reliable information, right? It's not always black and white. There are shades of gray, and there are more and less and somewhat reliable sources and things like that, especially in new sorts of information like breaking news. So some cool things that I want to share here, and I'm not sure if we're sharing slides after, maybe we can share these links. I could also share them in the chat. So I'm talking a lot about the people element, right? And one of the resources that many of you might be familiar with right now, I'm going to make sure this actually opens on the right screen that I'm sharing. We see in the bias media chart.
Yes.
Awesome, cool. All right, so y'all might have seen this before, but again, this is just kind of a nice passive guide to how different media outlets are rated in terms of their ideological prejudices or biases, because again, there is not neutral information. And there are a lot of resources kind of like this that are people fueled, or you may be familiar with Snopes, which is linked on another one of these link lists, which is a fact-checking site that's been around for a hot minute now, right? And it's people vetting other sources. But the cool thing is now we have resources like I use Observatory on social media, which is opening on the right page, but it's the wrong link, so that's on me, which actually provides things like on this page here, a technological angle here. So while historically we've been kind of reliant on people fact checking for us or people helping us as we fact check, there are now brilliant scholars out there and brilliant coders who are putting together tools that use the scripts and the coding and the APIs to counter some of the issues caused by scripts and coding and API whenever it comes to sharing this information. One of the bigger issues that you may be familiar with are bots, misinformation bots on Twitter, right? So the IU link, and I can pull that link up later, has some pretty sweet scripts on kind of pointing those bots out, right? So being able to use technology for good in this scenario is a huge step forward in terms of fact checking and in terms of just taking back control and using algorithms to our advantage. And then likewise, this last resource that I accidentally opened, I will now intentionally show, which is from the RAND Corporation, and it is a whole laundry list of different resources spanning from, again, those kind of human-centered elements to educational materials, a lot of interactive sort of things to better demonstrate the things that I have poorly explained here, and provide you kind of a deeper insight into how data manipulation happens in an online environment. And then, of course, those super tech features, which are both useful and highly fun if you're into it. And then finally, we're going to go a little old school. We're going to go a little analog here. You also have people in your immediate information ecosystem that are here to help you with this. Are we here to tell you what's right and wrong? Absolutely not, but we can help you conceptualize things and just critically discuss different ideas as they arise. So if you're here, you have access to USI librarians. We're totally happy to talk to you about information at any given point. If you live anywhere, you likely have a public library too, full of other information professionals who are here to, again, kind of help you dig through the weeds of these various information sources. And with that, I will pause, stop my share, and hopefully remove the spotlight. There we go. Cool. To Todd, if we want to tackle Q&A or anything?
Sure. So one of the questions is, have podcasters like Joe Rogan and others help popularize a number of these theories? Oh yeah, a lot of different individuals have. There's all kinds of web, YouTube celebrities that popularize many of these things. You can find this pretty much everywhere. The more extreme they get, though, usually they drop off to other kinds of places like Gab or Rumble or places like that when they have been deplatformed from other places. And you can see overlaps between varying levels of mainstream Republicans and mainstream right-wing individuals, and then these other groups, people that are, say, Holocaust deniers and people that are avowed anti-Semites, other things like that as well. So definitely there's all kinds that have been playing a role in this.
Todd, this was Alyssa. I just had a quick comment, and I wondered if you could address it.
Sure.
Several of the questions on the Q&A feature are about sort of various topics that don't really seem to be conspiracy theories. And I wonder if you could just clarify again, sort of what your conceptualization or definition of a conspiracy theory is.
Well, it's something that's held basically uncritically. It's something that does not go away with any kind of facts that are different from that, that is basically blaming a small group for something that occurred in society. Those are the kinds of things that I'm seeing as conspiracy theories. There are conspiracy theories on the left, on the right, whatever it is. These are the ones that I study, and that's what I'm presenting about. They seem to be the most dangerous ones right now in the United States, in my opinion, as well as the ideas of the federal government in terms of the FBI, Department of Homeland Security is saying the greatest threat to our society is coming from the right. All kinds of organizations like the ADL, so the Poverty Law Center, all kinds of organizations that study terrorism, counterterrorism, domestic terrorism issues in the United States. They are saying that the biggest threat comes from the right, that the threat coming from the left is almost insignificant, basically. And we've seen that for quite some time. The number of deaths that are associated with people from the left is almost none. Almost all of them are from individuals from the right, as well as the largest amounts of arrests as well. So that's kind of where I'm coming from, and that's what I'm looking at in terms of conspiracy theories.
I also wonder, just kind of combining a couple questions here, I wonder if perhaps both of you could comment, and you both commented on this in a typed response, but if you could comment on how to approach someone, a friend or a family member that believes in a conspiracy theory or is dedicated to a certain belief that is different from your own. How do you kind of mend those fences or broach that topic with that person?
So we definitely start with thumb wrestling, right? Jokes. No, and again, that's and Todd, I'll let you pick up what I drop here. But that's why this is so terribly difficult, right? Going back to the fact that a lot of this is really ideologically charged, and that we're all coming from different knowledge bases, different information ecosystems. And so it's finding that common ground to really start a conversation rather than a persuasion session, right? And it's something that takes a lot of time, because it takes understanding each other. And that sounds like just the big old optimism answer here, but that is where I'm coming from.
It's like I said, it's very difficult to try to change people's minds that have kind of fallen down some of these rabbit holes. And the main things you do is you kind of show sympathy for people's ideas or what they're feeling more than anything, that they feel persecuted, that they feel at risk, that they feel that they are losing something, those types of things, and try to focus on that more. You can also, be more confrontational, but try to take things, show people what the end point of their ideas are, or where the beginnings of their theories come from, or their ideas come from. If you look at a lot of these theories, they are basically just old anti-Semitic tropes that are behind a lot of conspiracy theories, right? You have this, evil cabal of people that are drinking the blood of white children. That's Protocols of Zion stuff, blood libel stuff from that. And that's exactly what QAnon's coming after. And if you just look at the overlap between those types of things, that can kind of help maybe bring people to the front. A lot of the problem is that people have no understanding of history in the United States. They have no understanding of things like what race actually is, or a lot of the issues they're talking about. And they're getting information from, Google and something is not researching things. The people need to go and, QAnon says learn for yourself, but the algorithms make you fall down a rabbit hole sometimes to try to do that. And so, yeah, it's very difficult to do. If you look at the end point, like, oh, well, stop the steal. What's the end point? Well, it's an overthrow. It's a coup of the United States. That's what that's going for. It's an armed coup. And so you just need to kind of maybe point some things out to people that aren't getting the big picture. That's what I would suggest. But it's incredibly difficult.
Thank you. And I think at this point, we're at the end of our time. Just to wrap things up, if both of you have just some final comments, concluding comments you'd like to make.
I'll go first because Todd's better at wordsing and he can round us off. But no, so I appreciate everybody coming, and again, the chat and the questions were very lively, and the important thing here is continuing conversations, right? So if anybody wants to reach out after this, I can throw my email in the chat and be happy to continue conversations.
Todd, any final comments?
You're muted.
Nope, I was just trying to answer one last person. But I hope you all enjoyed this. Take care, everyone. Thank you, Becca, for your participation.
Thanks to both of you. Thanks for all the attendees. This was recorded and the recording will be available. It will be posted through CSJE and the College of Liberal Arts YouTube pages. So look for that. Thank you very much for attending.